Hi guys, and a warm welcome back to the channel. Cooling down now, heading towards autumn, although it's still roughly 26-27 degrees today, so it's quite mild and good weather for biking. What I wanted to do in this video, and I've mentioned to a few people I was going to make this video, and I'm going to give you a few tips and tricks on the Voge 900 DSX to make your experience and your riding experience a little bit better and a little bit more comfortable. Now, some of the tips and tricks I'm going to give you, don't shoot me down. I mean, some of them you'll have been doing for years and years and years, and you guys that have adventure bikes will be quite aware of what I'm going to tell you. Those of you who have bought into this segment of the market, and you've probably first bike you've bought is this Voge DSX 900 because you fancied an adventure bike, or you were enticed by the price, or some of the videos I've got out there, or the general build quality, which is superb. Will take some comfort and enjoy your riding of this motorcycle a lot better if you're not aware of these things I'm going to tell you. Now, some of them are quite basic, but they're really good tips to know with this bike. Now, we know this bike is 240 kilos or thereabouts, wet weight, a bit more, 245. Certainly mine with 15 kg of luggage on the back, it's getting up towards 255, maybe 260, depending on what I've got in them. So a heavy lump of a bike. And a couple of the basic things I wanted to talk about to start with are really basic, but they're well worth knowing. First of all, when you park your bike, especially on the side stand, make sure that the bike is always parked in first gear. If you're going to leave your bike, make sure you park in first gear. Roll it to, dependent on if you're facing uphill or downhill. Ideally, you want to be facing uphill slightly. Downhill, if it's a slight downhill incline, you can still put it on the side stand as long as you're in first gear. So a good rule of thumb when you get off the bike is always to leave it in first gear. If you're in your parking area where you normally park the bike, again, when you come to manoeuvre the bike, if you're in a tight space, a tight garage, leave the bike in first gear. The reason you leave it in first gear, even during manoeuvring, is, as I'm going to mention now in the following tips I'm going to give you, when you're moving this bike around, if you've got this bike in neutral and you've got a slight slope either way, you're either going to be pushing uphill or pushing downhill. Either way, if you're going downhill and you're going backwards with the bike, so you hold the bike, and however you prefer to hold it, whether you hold it on the pannier, you hold it on the top rack, you hold it down on the side. But if you're moving back and forwards and you're in neutral, the clutch is going to be out, you're going to be rolling back. If you're on a slight incline going backwards, the bike's going to start running away from you. So what do? You can't get to the front brake, you can't get to the rear brake. As an emergency, you could try and drop it on the side stand if the side stands up, but that'll still drag back. It's going to be a lot of weight and you could lose control of the bike. So the idea when you're moving it around anywhere, guys, anywhere, first gear, clutch in, moving it around, moving it back and forwards. If you get into any difficulty when you're moving it, just drop the clutch and the bike will stop as if you're braking. So use the brake as a clutch. Pull the brake in, brake out, use the brake as a clutch. So when you want to stop, let the clutch out, and it's a good braking system. When you're mounting these bikes, especially with luggage on, again, this is a tip that most of you will know. You can mount it from either side, providing you're on decent level ground. Again, if even with it in first gear, what I would tend to do if I'm mounting from this side, a lot of people, when they're not used to this type of bike and they're used to mounting a bike, will try and do this and try and get the leg over the bike, which is a bit awkward, and then they'll try and get off the same way and they'll end up marking all the top box, side boxes, etc, etc. Now, the easiest way to mount any adventure bike, lean over, first of all, front brake. Make sure you've got the brake applied, even if you're in first gear. Your left foot on the left peg, lift your leg up and climb over quite easily onto the bike. Once you're on the bike, sit down, and then you can get the bike off the side stand. Now, you can do the same exit, getting onto the bike from the other side. Again, getting off the bike, make sure you hold the front brake. If you're going to get on from this side of the bike and you're on fairly level ground, again, not a problem, but you need to look at the axis or the pivot point of the weight of the bike. So you get on the opposite side from the stand, say you're parked up against something or a car's parked near you that side. What you need to do then is put your right foot on the other stand, put your weight over the bike, apply the front brake, and the same procedure, get your knee on the top and over the bike and over the other side. Now, another problem with heavy bikes, such as the DSX, depending on your leg height and your inner seam, if I put on the bearing in mind I'm not wearing my motorcycle boots. I've had motorcycle boots, they've got a slight heel on them, so I can flat foot it on the ground. This side on a motorcycle boot, the other side I can get the ball of my foot on. I've got an inside seam of 30, 31. This is all dependent on how you have the suspension set up. The harder it is, the higher the bike's going to be. But what I was going to explain next is on the side stand. When you first get on the bike, this particular bike, and you want to get it off the side stand, when we're on level ground like I am at the moment, it's quite easy for me to get it upright and then kick the stand away. If it was slightly cambering down to the side when the side stand is on, this bike then leans a good way over. When the bike's leaning a good way over and you're in this position, you've then, my foot would be sort of here, you've got to give a lot of weight to get the bike off the side stand, and it's really, really heavy to do that. What some people do, they put a piece of board under the side stand if they've got a slight camber in the garage or whatever. The easiest way to get off the side stand, even if you're on a severe slope going that way, is to turn the bars the complete opposite lock, and then even if you're on a severe stand, it's very, very easy to tip that way, because the handlebars are facing that way. There's hardly any weight in the bike. Already by doing that, I've made the bike more upright. If I turn it the other way, the bike drops down. So if you've got your bars facing to the left and you've got them on the steering lock, which most of us have when we park up, so we park up, you're on steering lock. Most people, when they get on the bike first time, they'll press the button to get the steering lock off. They'll have the bars like this and they'll be hugging away trying to get it off and like pushing and pushing, and you've got to use some leg muscle to get it off if it's like that. If it's straight, it's easier, but if you turn it on opposite lock, there's no weight at all to the bike. You're already sitting the bike up a good way by putting it on that lock. So there are a few simple tips most of you already know, but really, really beneficial for moving this cycle around and getting off the top stand, get off the side stand rather. Top stand, again, I've mentioned in previous videos, the location of the top stand is a bit stupid behind here. Again, what you need to do with the top stand, if you've got the bars facing that way and you've got to put it on the top stand, you're going to struggle because you've got a lot of weight. So what you need to do again is have the bars straight. You need to get the bike in an upright position. What I tend to do is leave the side stand down just in case there's any emergencies we face. Once you get the top stand on the ground and it's anchored on the ground, you then need to get further down, and you're not using the weight of your body, you're using the weight of your foot and a good firm press. Bearing in mind I was going uphill, going backwards slightly there, and she'll go on the top stand. It's not an easy thing to do, guys, but with a bit of practice, you can see I'm huffing and puffing a bit here, with a bit of practice you'll get used to doing it. Again, when you're going to take it off the top stand, I would suggest you put the side stand down first. I would suggest again that you always have it in first gear so that it's not going to go anywhere. And I'll show you what I mean by first gear. Now it's in first gear, so I won't touch any of the levers or clutch or anything, but I put it off the top stand. And you can see straight away once it lands, it doesn't want to go anywhere. So lands again into first gear, bike acts as a brake, side stand drops on itself normally, and you're pretty good to go. Some good tips for you there, guys, to start with, and they're basic tips. The next series of tips are more relevant if you're riding pillion, but also relevant if you're riding on your own. Now, what I'll do, I'll bring the camera round to this side. So I'll just take this weight I've got off the tripod and I'll bring it round. I think maybe put it there. We'll just see what the view's like in the camera. Maybe a bit nearer. So we're right up to the bike. So we're looking at the front of the bike there, and I'll try and explain from this perspective I'm in at the moment, or the actual view I'm in, and I hope it's picking up this okay. Most of us in the past in the UK, certainly riders from an older generation of riders, myself included, I began riding in the 70s, and to be honest, we could ride up to 250cc, up to 17. Once you got to the age of 17, you could take a license. That gave you access to a big bike license. There's none of this A2 and going up to different grades of licenses, so you can jump straight off a 250 at 17, straight onto a big bike. If you'd have been riding your 250 on L plates for the first year while you were 17, before you went on to a bigger bike, it was pretty easy then, without going through a lot of lessons, just to book a test, do your theory part of the test, and an examiner would follow you around a set route round to local town. He'd be behind you with an intercom and giving you instructions, etc. So what I mean by that is most of us had no formal bike education. We learned to drive, we learned to ride by ourselves. Okay, we might have had some tips from friends and family, but by doing that, our generation picked up a lot of bad habits, and the bad habits we picked up stem from the type of bikes we were riding as well. Certainly sports bike riders, and you'll know what I mean in a minute when I talk about it. When you're riding a sports bike, and I used to be the same on my Daytona 1000, my Triumph, I'd ride it and I'd always cover the front brake lever with 2 fingers, so I'd have my hand on the accelerator there, and depending how light the brake was, 1 or 2 fingers on the brake. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, trail braking into corners, very light braking on the front brake, helps the front to dive down, gives you better line on the corner, and it turns in better. The problem with it, once you ingrain that 2 fingers on the front brake, it sticks, and it's a muscle memory thing that's ingrained. When you get a bike like the Voge 900 or any big bike, apart from a GS, and I'll explain that in a minute, any other big bike that you buy, when you're riding these bikes, they've got very soft sprung suspension front and back. Okay, you can damp it down so it's quite hard. When you're riding solo, and I'll move the camera again and I'll show you what I mean. Let's put the camera in this position and we'll roll the bike back a bit. Again, clutch in because we're in gear, clutch out as a brake, and I'll just check the position of the camera. We're still in shot there. So what I want you to look at is the front suspension. Now, on a bike like this, and I'll get on, I've not mounted it, I showed you to mount that, I just did it for speed there. So what I want to show you now is we're still in first gear, but I wanted to show you the bounce on the front of the bike. You can see it's quite aggressive. When you ride this bike, what a lot of us do, if we've been riding sports bikes previously, you'll be coming up to a junction and you'll go down through the gears, you'll pull the clutch in as you come to a junction, you may be in first, and as you come to the junction to stop, with it being quite high, you may even put both feet down ready to get purchase on the ground, coming up to the junction, and you'll press the front brake to stop at the junction, which is a bad thing all round. And as you stop at the junction, you'll get the final lurch at the junction and the front end will dive. Depending on the camber of the ground, it unseats the settlement of the bike. It totally destabilizes the bike. You can do it, you can use both brakes to come up to the junction, front and back, and slow down. But predominantly, because this is so high and we're aware that, you know, we're looking at the ground either side to see where we're going to get the best foot purchase, most of us, and this is a bad habit we've got into, will be using the front brake to stop at a junction, which is a real bad thing. You should only ever use the front brake over 10, 15 mile an hour, maybe 20 kph and above. Never be. So what you need to be doing, guys, as you come up to a junction on a heavy bike that's top heavy, you've got a heavy gas tank of fuel at the top, you don't want to unstabilize this bike in any way. We know the front end lurches with the soft suspension. So as you come up to a junction, brake using the rear brake and the front brake up to about 15 kilometers, 20 kilometers per hour. Once you get to 20 kilometers per hour, start changing down through the gears. Your right foot should be on the foot brake. Your hand should be totally off the front brake, and this leg should be out dangling as you come into a halt, and you gently press on the rear brake, come to a steady halt, and with your leg out, as I've got mine, okay, it's on the floor, but normally I would have it out. As you come up to a slow halt, the weight of this leg being out will direct you over and you'll come down and you'll come to a stop. If you dangle both legs on the ground and use the front brake, as you get to the junction, you'll get a dive on the front, and it's more pronounced than I've just done that, because obviously under the load of the engine going forwards, it will dive down, it will spring back up. When it springs back up, you'll see many YouTube videos, if you search for them, where people on sports bikes have come to a sharp, abrupt stop, use the front brake, it's dived, come up and it's shot them off the bike. That's even more so with a big heavy bike and a tall bike like DSX. So always use your rear brake, guys. If you start doing this, go out, start exercising, coming up to your junctions, forget about covering that front brake with your 2 fingers. It's a real hard habit to break, because I do it all the time, and I'm as guilty as anybody else of doing it. And because I've got that covered all the time, or I generally tend to cover that all the time, what I do intuitively, I should say, again, another tongue-tied word there, guys. What I tend to do intuitively, as I get to a junction, I may be braking with a foot brake, as I'm pulling on the front brake, it's diving the front of the bike down. Now, when you're on your own on this particular bike, guys, that won't be a problem. If you're riding on your own, you've got a lot more control. It's just you on the bike. There's only you're thinking about. It's still a bad practice to get into using a front brake at any junction, traffic lights, anywhere. The reason it's a bad thing as well is that when you stop at a junction, you've got the clutch in, you're in first gear, and say you're on a bit of an incline, you've got both feet on the ground, because you're not getting in the habit of just putting your left foot on the ground and the other one on the foot brake. You've got both feet on the ground, you're on a slight slope backwards. So what you're doing then is you've got two fingers on the front brake, you're turning the throttle with the back of your hand and you're releasing the clutch. So you're trying to release the front brake at the biting point on an incline to get away. And often in that situation you can get a stall quite easily because the brake's still biting, you're giving it the normal amount of revs you would rev away on a flat surface, you'll stall the bike. A stall then is just as bad because the front end will dive fairly quickly, and again it'll throw you one way, and if you're not tall enough, once it goes past a certain point, you're on trying to pull it back up to straight and it's stalled. And we've all been there. It'll be an embarrassing moment for you. But what you should be at a junction, you should be in this position, it should be canted over to this side, foot firmly on the ground, this foot on the ground, this foot always covering the brake. If you're down and uphill, the bike's not going to go anywhere. You've got the clutch engaged, you're in first gear. When you see the traffic's clear, accelerate, find the biting point, then release the foot brake. So you're not doing anything else with this right hand that you would find disadvantageous to getting away from that junction. So I was saying before that that's more advantageous. This system is more advantageous with a pillion on the back, because if you've got a pillion on the back, you've got twice the weight. So you lurch on a junction because you're using a front brake. With a pillion on the back, you're far more likely then to cause the rebound to come up very, very sharply and kick you off the bike either way, kilt you one way or the other. And it can be quite a jolt if you do that. The only problem with stopping on the rear brake is you need to have a good line of sight of the junction you're coming up to. Obviously, if you want this foot down and you're on a slight camber that way, so the road's leaning that way, you've got a long way to go down that way, and that might be one of the rare occasions where you slow down very slowly on the rear brake and at the last minute slowly ease on the front brake. But I would advise on this particular bike, get into the habit of going out, riding round slowly, first or second gear, forget about that front brake altogether and just practice using the rear brake all the time coming up to junctions. It's very hard not to put your fingers on that front brake coming up to junction, but practice rear brake only stops at junctions and you'll find your general run up to the junctions will be smoother, your stopping will be smoother, you'll feel a lot more confident as you get into the junction and putting your foot down. So all good tips to have. Again, a lot of you guys will already know a lot of this and you'll have been taught that way. Modern riding schools will have you going around a circuit. They won't let you touch that front brake if you're stopping. But like I said before, those of us who just grew up growing into bikes and riding them and taking our test and passing because we could ride the bike round, we've got into some bad habits, especially if you ride a sports bike. So there are a couple of my tips that I hope you find invaluable about this bike. Like I say, certainly if you're riding with a pillion, a lot of weight on the back, it's a big lump of a bike to ride around. But once you have a mindset about junctions and roundabouts and all the rest of it, it's a very, very easy bike to ride. What you'll find is if you drop this bike or you're manoeuvring it around and it goes over and you drop it, it's a lump to lift up. You can lift it. Again, if you're going to lift it, make sure the side stands down, make sure you're in first gear before you try and lift it. You don't want it rolling anywhere. Yeah, so guys, hope these tips have been useful to you. Give me a like, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll get more videos out to you very soon. I'm coming up to 4,000 kilometers on this now, and you will be aware, some of you guys will be aware, back in my videos, I did a video of how to reset the factory throttle reset. It's a standard BMW thing after the service. If the battery's been off, it's a standard procedure to just reset the throttle. What I found myself doing the other day, I thought the bike had gone a bit jerky again and it was bobbling around a bit. And I thought, oh, I'll try the reset again. And I set it smooth in every single gear, no jerkiness, no jumping. So I would suggest every now and again, every few thousand mile, if it's getting a bit out of hand, go back to that old video of mine and reset the throttle, and you'll certainly have a lot smoother ride. One final tip I would give you, and what I was going to do, I was going to end it there, but I've just thought of another one that's popped into my head. To make a better, smoother ride once you've done the throttle reset, on the DSX and on a lot of bikes, most of us tend to change gear by pulling the clutch lever all the way in, changing gear, clutch lever out, clutch lever in, change gear, clutch lever out. That, on this particular bike and a lot of bikes, that's probably the worst thing you can do. What you need to do on the clutch is when you start the bike up, put it in first gear, release the clutch and find the biting point, and you'll notice it's probably 2 centimeters away from the hand grip, maybe 2.5 centimeters. It's a fair way away. So that proves that the biting point is not pulling the clutch all the way in. Again, a lot of you guys will know this tip and you'll already be doing this, but when you change gear for a smoother gear change on this, you only need to be pulling the clutch lever halfway in between gear changes, and the gear change will be a lot smoother. So halfway in, click, halfway out, halfway in, click, halfway out, up and down the box, same thing. If you can't get the hang of it, if you've got gloves on, and use 2 fingers on the clutch and leave your other 2 fingers make sure you've got gloves with the knuckle protectors on, leave the other 2 fingers behind the clutch lever. As you pull the clutch in, the clutch will only then go as far as your knuckle on the knuckle protectors on your gloves, and you'll get into the habit of only pulling it halfway in, because it can't physically go past your knuckles then, so you're only going to pull it in with 2 fingers, you're going to pull it halfway. What you'll find on this particular bike, if you're pulling it all the way in, all the way out, it will be a long throw on the clutch. You'll lose some revolutions in the engine. That will get it out of sync, and you get a much more clunkier gear change on any bike, not just this bike. So really, you only need to pull the clutch in as far as a biting point. Often when we get on a bike and we pull it in, we pull it all the way back to the bar and put it in first gear, and then we release it to go. But certainly when you're riding, you only need to pull it back a tiny bit, only half a pull back to change each gear, and you'll find your gear changing a lot smoother. Along with the throttle reset, you'll find the bike's night and days different to what it was before. So sorry for waffling on, guys. An extra tip there for you. Catch you in the next one. Peace out, ride safe, and give me some feedback, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out, guys.